Well, morning. Welcome back to Business Talk. I'm your host, Michael Avery. And today we're double-clicking on a topic that, let's be honest, many businesses only think about after disaster strikes. Business continuity management, or BCM for short. And you know, that thing that makes sure your company doesn't go the way of the fax machine when the unexpected happens. It's super important, but often we only think about it far too late in the process. Now, I've had the pleasure of speaking with Willem Olivier, CEO of Resilient Innovations before, and if there's one thing that I know, it's that he doesn't do panic mode. With over 2 decades in the business of keeping businesses running, whether through power cuts or cyber attacks or some of the more creative crises South Africa likes to throw at us, Willem has certainly seen it all. Last time we spoke, he had led the management buyout of the data continuity practice, launching Resilient Innovations into the market with a really fresh approach to resilient solutions. Now, a year in, we're checking back just to see how the business landscape is shifting, whether companies are finally taking resilience seriously, and what's next for BCM in South Africa. So let's get into it. Willem, great to have you back on the show. And shall we say, at a time when with stage 6 load shedding, I think building resilience is front and center in most business leaders' minds at the moment. So it was quite prescient that we're having the chat now. Firstly, how do you define business continuity management, or BCM, and why is it more critical than ever in South Africa in 2025?
Good morning, Michael, and thank you for hosting me today around business continuity management. Your question around what is business continuity, in essence, it's basically getting a program in place in your organization that will help you to recover your company or your business functions or a specific business function within your organization in the event of a disaster or a crisis. And those things could be anything from a fire in your building to a ransomware attack or some cybercrime attack, to a network outage or a power outage. And in South Africa, that's quite relevant, is typically load shedding, which has caused a lot of companies to build some form of resilience in their organizations.
Absolutely. That's a very high level kind of elevator pitch of what BCM is in a nutshell. I'm sure there's lots more detail underneath that, but I'm sure you've also seen the evolution over the last 20 years where when I started working in the early 2000s, fax machines were just being phased out, and business resilience still back then meant having 2 of those ADSL lines. If you can cast your mind back, that was business resilience back then. How have you seen business continuity evolve, both globally and specifically here in South Africa over the last 2 decades?
Business continuity has evolved over quite a number of years. Over the past 25 years, we've seen quite a significant change in business continuity, especially moving from disaster recovery into the business continuity field. And mainframe computers, I don't want to say they're dying out, but changing significantly. Computer systems downscaling in terms of size, but at the same time also upscaling in terms of capacity to store data. That's been quite a significant change over the last 25 years. And data centers have changed also, where a lot of companies have had their own data centers to store their data, but then at the same time, a lot of organizations like the likes of Google and these guys have all built massive data centers globally. There are a lot of global companies also building data centers, even here in South Africa. And we can see that. And I think that it's a lot about storage and where do you store all of this massive amount of data that we are going to store and utilize in our organizations. So there's been quite a significant change from that perspective. What we've also seen is that a lot of companies have embraced business continuity management as a program, especially the banks, financial institutions, government, etc. And a lot of them have their own programs in place. They also utilize their own people. They've spent a lot of money to make sure that it's in place. In many cases, it's a regulatory requirement from the Financial Services Conduct Authority or the South African Reserve Bank or the Bank of England for that matter. But it is a global thing. It's not just a South African thing or a UK thing or an American thing. It definitely is something that has embedded itself into organizations, and the need for it has not gone away. It may have changed slightly, if you want to call it moving into resilience, But that's also in terms of smaller companies. For instance, a tire fitment company, for them, they would build resilience, because if the power goes off, because that's one of the key things that they require to do business, is obviously to have a generator to provide power to keep the equipment going. For larger organizations, that resilience has changed, especially around how they switch over data, for instance, from a production into a DR mode. It's not just simply by switching off and waiting 2 or 3 hours and then switching back on. So that resilience has got to be, in some cases, your recovery time objective instantaneous. So yes, there's been a significant change in the BCM field. The planning has also changed. A lot of people are embracing the way that they document their plans and also update their plans.
And I remember last time we spoke, we touched on the fact that many businesses probably still see BCM as kind of a nice to have rather than a necessity. Have you noticed a shift in how companies approach resilience, or is it still something they only think about when things go wrong?
A lot of companies over the years, especially when BCM started out, saw business continuity management as a grudge purchase. It's like insurance. You got to have it because some regulator told you that you got to have it. But with all of the disasters that are happening globally, cyber attacks that are happening, terrorist attacks that have happened since 2001 especially, it's been a significant change in the way that warfare has been changed over the last 50 or 60 years, and especially terrorism. So you have to consider things like bomb attacks as well in countries where those things are quite prevalent, and especially if you are countries that some of the terrorists do not like, then yes, you may be a target. But that's just from a war perspective. But from a cybercrime perspective, there's also a major impact on organizations, and that goes for every organization. It's not just a big organization. The amount of hacks that take place with companies are quite significant. It does impact every company that you can think of. If you do not have a firewall, or you don't have a service that provides with that firewall, you will be exposed. And if you have firewalls, for instance, that do not have updates on it, then a VPN might also be useless, especially what we've seen over the last few weeks. So from a return on investment perspective, you don't necessarily see the return the day that you start building your resilience in your organization. It's the day that something happens to you. And you can sit and plan, and you can have 500 different scenarios, and you can work through all of them. But often it's the one that you didn't plan for that really struck you. And a good example is one of late, which was the Heathrow Airport, which they've had infrastructure in place. I know that these guys do a lot of good business continuity planning. They're a big airport. It's a massive infrastructure, huge amount of airplanes flying into that environment. And yes, they do have multiple backups of power, but even the backup power systems were impacted with the substation fire, which brought the whole airport down, stranded about 1,700 flights and about 200,000 passengers. And those things are quite impactful if that does happen. It's those are the things that you've got to be conscious of and try to work through them. Personally, myself, I've seen disasters and crises happen in Africa, where I've developed a lot of disaster recovery facilities and business continuity planning, put programs in place. And I've seen some weird things which we never thought of. It's just that, but you have to have some form of crisis management planning in place that will help you to work through the process of getting through that stages and making sure that you can survive a crisis or an incident.
So, I mean, say I'm a company that's never then implemented a formal BCM strategy before. I've maybe looked at some of the continuity elements just to keep my business running. And I think often that relates to energy or water, just given some of the municipal dysfunction that we see around us. Where do I even start if I'm a BCM newbie?
For companies that have never developed any form of business continuity planning, my advice to them would be, you got to start somewhere. And somewhere is go into the internet and go and find it, especially small to medium enterprises organizations, because many large organizations, banks and multinationals, they tend to have these things in place. But to start off with is to decide on a business continuity program. Is it going to be a ISO standard, or are you going to utilize the Business Continuity Institute's good practice guide to help you guide along what to do? But one of the key points that you have to have in place is your board approval. You have to have your directors of the organization buy into business continuity to say that, yes, we want to do this, and yes, we are willing to go the extra mile and also to spend the money. Now, if you want to start off with it, typically the first thing that you would do is to implement a business impact assessment, quantify what you're going to cover in that impact assessment. As an example, the outcome of an impact assessment will then lead into a strategy of what you're going to recover and what not. For example, if you have an internal training department in your organization, is that something that you would want to continue to run after your building, for instance, caught fire and you can't access your building? So in your impact assessment, you go through these things, and then from there you decide what is critical, what is not critical, what are your recovery time objectives, etc. From there, you can build your own recovery strategy. Is what you're going to do, how far you're going to build your recovery center if you need to do that. In some instances, I mean, like a production environment, for instance, a factory, you can't have another factory standing there on the one side waiting for a disaster to happen. It's just not feasible. But you can consider your supply chain in that process. If something happens that has impacted your factory or partially impact your factory, is what can you do to change that? Or change your supply chain to access specific goods and services. In terms of taking the process from there, it's also developing business continuity planning, put plans in place, put crisis communications plans in place, make sure that you have a crisis plan in place for your executive team or for your directors of the organization, especially a media plan. Also, what you do if you in the media, like exactly what happened with Heathrow Airport. They were very criticized for a lot of things that have gone wrong, although they have a massive business continuity plan in place. But still, they still got criticized for it. So you got to be able to deal with media. So that's definitely one of the things that do come up. Secondly, also from taking that further, is to consider testing. You got to test your planning. It's not just a good idea to say, well, I've got a plan, and yes, my recovery site is built, I've got a few seats, and I've got a computer standing at a data center, some other location. But have you tested that plan, and have you tested that computer system to make sure that you can access the data, access the systems? That after that, if you've done your planning, train your staff, make sure that they know what to do. And then the program starts again the next following year. You never stop. It's not a defined waterfall project that starts with a beginning and a defined end. It's something that will continue in terms of your business if you have to have business continuity planning in place.
Is that one of the common pitfalls that you see, that kind of planning doesn't go in? What are the biggest mistakes that you see companies making when they do finally decide to implement a BCM plan?
Yeah, so a lot of the common mistakes that companies do, what we see, the biggest one that companies that implement business continuity is that they don't test. You should test at least once or twice a year. Make sure that all of your systems that you have at your recovery facility is also up to date with patches and so forth. So those are some of the big things that we've seen. Sometimes companies come in, they test with all of the good intentions, but then the technology part failed because patches weren't done and the data was, or the systems were out of sync from production. So we've seen those kinds of things happen before. And then from a cloud perspective, a lot of companies would, for instance, say, well, my stuff is in the cloud. I've got everything's in Microsoft. But you don't necessarily know where it is. So make sure that you know where your data is stored. Make sure that if you've got a software as a service from a company that's providing that service to you from somewhere in Europe or the US, then make sure that they have recovery plans in place. That's will help you to recover your data if something does go wrong. Then also in terms of updating plans, updating telephone numbers in plans, those are things that also companies tend to fail. companies always have a movement of a lot of people. So BCM programs are it's not a end state ever achieved in a business continuity plan. A business continuity plan is a ever changing document. So you got to update that with people data, location data, systems data, and also recovery data in terms of how you're going to change it, because technology moves on so quick. And as soon as the technology changes, you're going to start changing your continuity planning components as well.
Absolutely. And it's often people think it's an end state or a destination. But because the technologies change, because the threat landscape changes and evolves constantly, it's something that has to be reviewed, I would imagine, almost on an annual basis. Before we come into some of the trends that you're seeing coming down the line in the next 5 to 10 years, because I'm just amazed at how quickly AI is developing. Like Microsoft announced the launch of their Majorana One chip, and quantum computing is now moving forward, which is just crazy. I want to stay on the cost issue and the ROI question, because I think it's probably one of the biggest pushbacks against investing in resilience is the cost. So how do you measure the return on investment for a strong BCM strategy?
Measuring return on investment of a business continuity management strategy or a plan or a program is extremely difficult, because you have to buy systems that cater for a backup of some sorts or a recovery seat of some sorts. But to really get to a direct investment return is very difficult, purely because of the cost factor. But it's only at the time of a massive crisis or a disaster or an incident where you're really going to start seeing that return, especially if you're a call center and you're an inbound call center for a 24-hour roadside assistance or a emergency medical services, and there are people's lives at stake.
Yeah, I mean, if I can think, if you're a bank and your systems go down, you could look at something that costs into the hundreds of millions, if not even billions. So it's really, really difficult. But again, why you've got to have a proper view through the organization, and to be able to plan, you've got a scenario plan to say, well, if we are out for 48 hours or 72 hours, what is the impact on our top line, on our bottom line, on our staff, on all of our stakeholders? So it really is critical. Coming back to the trends and what you see coming down the line, what's next for BCM? Because we know, as I said, technologists evolves at a lightning speed, very difficult to keep up. Are there any emerging trends or disruptions that you see on the horizon?
I do see a significant change in business continuity over the next 5 to 10 years. Like I said previously, that things have changed over the past 25 years around business continuity, but definitely in the future, the technology is changing so fast now. AI is moving ahead so quickly. It's starting to replace a lot of people's jobs, etc. The reliance on technology is becoming bigger and bigger. And yes, also robotic systems have changed as well over many, many years. There are factories in China that, for instance, I call it a dark factory that build cars. There's no people involved in that. So the world has definitely changed significantly. From a continuity planning perspective, that doesn't change necessarily. You still got to consider those things, that what is the impact on your business if something does go wrong. If it is that you have a supply chain issue, for instance, a flood in Thailand, for argument's sake, and they provide you with parts to build a vehicle here in South Africa, then you may have a problem. There's always been chip problems in the last 5 to 10 years, where companies have failed to gain access to ICs and chips that's got to go into cars. So those are the things that you got to consider. You got to consider that these things are maybe automated in factories internationally. Have you considered changing your supply chain? And then also from a cloud perspective, is where does your data sit? That is, I think, a big component. That's a big worry. If your organization loses the application, for instance, or the primary system goes down, but your data is safe, then yes, you can recover it. It might take a few days if you don't have everything in place from a DR perspective. But in terms of your data, if that's gone, your business is compromised. What we've also seen is in terms of disaster recovery as a service and backup as a service, that is definitely changed a lot in South Africa. We provide a service, for instance, which is called disaster recovery as a service, where the primary application is hosted on one of our platforms, in our cloud platforms, and the data is based in that same cloud platform, which means that if the primary system goes down at your office, you spin up the disaster recovery as a service, and you can restart your systems from that point. But if that also fails due to a compromised data, for instance, at your primary site, which is now spilled over into DRaaS site, into your DRaaS, you can always have a fallback into backup as a service. Backup as a service is data that you store, which is just data. It's nothing else. It's also immutable. Nobody can delete it. It's very difficult to access it as well. Chances are that it's compromised. It's 0 to none. Just from a backup and disaster recovery as a service, our service is based in South Africa. No data goes out of the country, which is quite an important component because governments don't allow that. From a POPI perspective, that's a big issue. Also, international organizations, also GDRP as an example, is also a big thing for the Europeans, and the Americans have similar data protection laws that they require the data to be protected somehow. In South Africa, for governments, it's important that the data remains here. But then also, if you do have data that you've, for instance, placed onto some international cloud platform and you want to move that from the one to the other, or you want to move it to a local system, your egress cost of getting that data out of those international platforms could be extremely costly, and it can also be very, very time consuming to do that. Whereas our cloud solution remains in South Africa and is based here in Johannesburg, and we do have backups of that as well.
That's enough to keep any CEO, CTO, CFO up at night thinking about potentially losing all of your critical data, mission critical client data. You mentioned the compliance factor earlier on. We've got the POP years. There's so many more regulatory requirements. They're becoming stricter across industries. So how much do compliance and governance influence these BCM strategies today?
We've also seen a lot of uptake in business continuity management in organizations that are not necessarily banks and financial institutions, but also medical aid companies. A lot of organizations that manufacture medical equipment, for instance, that are utilized in hospitals and so forth, X-ray machines, MRIs, etc. Those things do require a lot of data backup as well, and also to make sure that you can restore the data for your patients if that's necessary. So we've seen a lot of uptake from various organizations in the agricultural field, mining, as well as medical fields. So business continuity management is not just for a bank or a financial institution or a municipality or some government office. It is definitely across all sectors of business.
Well, Willem, always a pleasure having you on the show. Insights, as always, invaluable. And I think if this chat has made even one business leader take BCM more seriously, I'd say we've done our job. So thanks so much for your time. And to our listeners, remember, hoping for the best is not a strategy. Planning for the worst, now that's how you keep the lights on. Until next time, stay resilient. I'm Michael Avery, here on Business Talk, only on Business Tech.